אני רוצה להזמין את אלוף במסגרת במילואים ראובן בן-שלום. כיום הוא משמש כמנכ"ל חברת CCS המתמחה באסטרטגיות בין תרבותיות.
Colleagues, friends, allies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Last week, an Israeli Air Force jet reportedly intercepted an unmanned aircraft over the Gaza Strip. But when relating to the same kind of technology operated by our side, the Air Force doesn't call it unmanned, but remotely manned. Notice that on the slides in English, they write remotely piloted. Unmanned terminology in Israel went through several phases. In the beginning, we just said malat, which is the Hebrew acronym for plane without a pilot. When small UAVs came online, we called them mazlat, which looks like the acronym for Mazel Tov, but in fact means tiny plane without a pilot. Then came the acronym Katbam, which stands for Unmanned Aerial Vehicle, and served as a good Hebrew equivalent of UAV. But in pursuit of a human-centric agenda, the Israeli Air Force took it one step forward by changing Katbam to Katmam, which literally means aircraft manned from afar or remotely manned aerial vehicle. But again, only if it's ours. An Iranian drone is still just unmanned. Apparently, terminology is not merely a technicality, but a cultural reflection of technological evolution. Let's take a look at current terminology. Here we see the tricopter. Of course, we have the quadcopter, quadricopter, or quadrocopter. Then there's the hexacopter, and of course, the octocopter. But a generic term which covers all drones with blades is multicopter. The proper Hebrew term is Rav Lahav. Rav means rabbi, but also multi. So, Rav Lahav means multi-blade. It is also commonly referred to as Rachfan, which literally means that which hovers. There are multiple synonyms used interchangeably in the UAS industry. Because the evolution of aviation has led us to perceive the normal state of an aircraft as having a pilot, drone terminology has evolved with an emphasis on the absence of the pilot, such as unmanned, unpiloted, uninhabited, non-crewed, pilotless, and cockpitless aircrafts. Popular acronyms are the good old unmanned aerial vehicle, which turned into unmanned aircraft system, mainly because it's cool to talk about systems and not components, and if you want to sound profound, you say system of systems. Then we have the unmanned aircraft vehicle system, small unmanned aircraft system, mini or miniature unmanned aerial system, unmanned combat aerial system, and simply the unmanned aircraft. It's funny that when drones are small enough, we don't feel the need to emphasize that they are unmanned, such as in micro air vehicle. The question is, how small do they need to be to make it obvious that there are no little people inside? After getting used to the fact that machines can actually fly themselves, we now have terms which reflect the independent nature of modern technology, such as robotic aerial system or autonomous aerial system. There are terms which reflect both, such as automated, piloted vehicle. But we are pretty much obsessed with clarifying that humans are still in control. So we have the remotely operated aircraft, remotely piloted vehicle, remotely piloted aircraft, remotely piloted aerial vehicle, and of course the remotely piloted aerial system. Biological evolution is a great metaphor for technological advancement. Generally speaking, evolution means change in characteristics of populations over successive generations by genetic variation, reproduction, and natural selection. That is, survival of the fittest in an ever-changing environment. Technological evolution is very similar. Driven by necessity to meet our needs and wants, and guided and constrained by our know-how and resources, we develop ever-improving machines with better specs and better traits. Of course, machines don't have babies, but the metaphor is good enough. Bottom line, we see change and improvement over time from primitive prototypes to superior technologies by natural selection at every stage. Actually, it's not natural selection, but artificial selection, because we are the ones doing the choosing. We do the same in biological evolution. Artificial selection, that is, humans selectively breeding for desired traits, leads us to better crops, exquisite orchids, strange dogs, like this one. But with technological evolution, it's much more than people just choosing. We mistakenly perceive ourselves as calculated and analytical beings, led by plans, risk management, and cost-benefit calculations. But this is far from the truth. Our actions are heavily influenced by our beliefs, our fears, our conceptions, our misconceptions, by cognitive biases, by our culture, and mainly by our big, fat ego. Perhaps, if we were only led by practical considerations, we would no longer send human pilots to babysit bombs, but simply send the bombs to take out the targets independently. If it were not for a variety of influences, would our technologies have been exactly the same? Probably not. This is why terminology is so important. Words do much more than describe things. They shape our perception and therefore influence our actions. Proper terminology is essential. When terms are vague and confusing, it's hard to focus collective efforts. Precise and clear categorization is vital for regulation aimed at mitigating safety and security challenges. Also, public support may waver if terms give the wrong idea. For instance, the term drone, which used to describe passive, pre-programmed or radio-controlled target practice dummies, has in recent years gained somewhat of a negative connotation with the rise of lethal autonomous weapon systems. People genuinely fear the rise of killer robots. Well, at least when they're big, because micro-drone doesn't sound too scary. Unmanned terminology is progressing by leaps and bounds, while unmanned terminology is having a hard time keeping up. Remote control sounds like a toy. Unmanned, as was discussed this morning, raises the question, why not unwomaned? Autonomous sounds too independent, when humans are still in the loop. Remotely piloted is ridiculous because modern systems need no real piloting, and clinging to old narratives won't change the fact that soon artificially intelligent swarms of robots will operate autonomously. They will not be piloted, they will not be manned, not even remotely. Also, robots will seamlessly traverse several mediums. Don't forget that I only discussed aerial platforms this morning, but there are also surface and underwater marine vessels, ground vehicles, subterranean robots, and spacecrafts, and they all have their own acronyms. In conclusion, just as we no longer need to say cordless phones, of course they're cordless, perhaps we can stop saying unmanned or pushing the remotely piloted and remotely manned agenda. We should coin simple terms to describe these machines, terms that keep us all on the same page, terms that enable robust regulation, terms that drive innovation, terms that don't scare anybody, and terms that won't sound ridiculous in the near future. Thank you very much.